great to see everybody here. Charlotte, let's start first with you, because what I need to know from you is what is fueling this need for banks to innovate? What's the engine here?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think it's about the long-term survival of banks, isn't it? Like, I mean, I don't want to be melodramatic, but that's kind of why we're all here. We need to retain customers and grow our businesses, and you can't really do that if you're not innovating. There are various different kind of drivers behind that. Obviously, our customers' expectations around the experience that they receive from us has like drastically increased over the past kind of decade. We're seeing a lot of regulatory pressure, whether it's PSD2 or now a lot of the kind of climate stuff that's really starting to hit, and rightly so. And there's only going to be more of that, right, as we kind of stare down the face of open data, digital currencies, digital identity, hopefully, so there's that piece. And then I think the other bit you can't really ignore is just competition. I know we kind of talked a little bit earlier about not being competition-led in terms of your innovation strategy, but you really can't ignore a lot of the challenges that are kind of coming our way from the fintech space in particular and big tech, and there's just such a huge amount of investment going into those industries in the last kind of year or so. I think BC investment in fintech just in the UK like doubled in 2021. So there's a lot of kind of pressure to innovate coming from that side of things as well.
Okay, so pressure to innovate, but above all, Dan, you have to do it to survive. Perfectly sound reasons, but at the end of the day, sometimes the end product doesn't do it for the customer. And that makes it a bit of an indulgence exercise, really. So when developing new propositions, what do you have to consider? Because at the end of the day, you have to bring real value to the customer. If you fail to do that, and you've just wasted everybody's time and money.
Well, that's right. I think it's important to remember, and I think a lot of banks are struggling with the fact that from the average customer's point of view, there's really not that much difference between financial products that they offer, and new products that do come into the marketplace are quickly replicated. So there's not a lot of advantages to rapid product innovation, even though everybody's really into that. And I think it's really important. Where you look at more successful financial institutions and fintechs, where it really stands out, it's about the experience. The product and the experience are enmeshed together. The product is the experience is really the product. And I think if you look under the hood and you dive into that, you really look at design, experience-based design, design thinking, and looking at the whole customer journey from beginning to end, from the customer's perspective inward versus from a product perspective outward, which is often the case if you start internally with these large organizations. And then empowering that with deep customer insights, really a constant flow of experience insights coming directly from customers, but also looking at their behaviors and what they're doing online, on your apps, what they're saying through your contact centers, and bringing that all in. And then adding that into, layering that together with what's important for the employee experience. So, the flip side of a great customer experience is a great employee experience. So there's a lot of effort these days, and I know many institutions here are looking at, well, how can we empower and enable and even inspire employees better to deliver that great customer experience at every step through the customer journey, and really analyzing that on a disciplined basis.
So turning things around on its head, Charlotte, you have to ask yourself, what brings real value from your perspective? What is it?
Well, I think the most obvious one that sometimes we gloss over is money in the customer's pocket, isn't it? Particularly in the SME banking space. I think we've seen some fintechs do some really great things. Tide have just really taken over a lot of that space for the early stage SMEs, just because they're a lot cheaper and they can do that digital experience piece as well. Ultimately it kind of comes down to how are you solving that job to be done that the customer has in a kind of faster, cheaper, easier, more delightful and kind of memorable, as we had earlier, like experience. And that comes down to all of the hygiene factors that we're all very well aware of, but also how are you kind of creating that kind of wow experience and that kind of emotional piece of it. And that's really hard to put a price on, but I think more and more we're kind of seeing customers place value on the kind of ethical, ESG, purpose-driven kind of side of it as well.
Joris, come into the conversation, because look, from your perspective, how do you think open data will transform the propositions of banks in terms of speed and at the same time personalization?
I think it will allow banks to develop new products, like centered around the real life of people. I think I like what Daniel just said about experience of products, right? Let's face it, I mean, a lot of stuff is happening in the customer's life has not related to financial, but the big and small problems in their life. And through open banking, I think we can be a part of the life of the customer. And if you think of other industries opening up themselves through APIs too, we can even think about a more integrated user experience where data from different industries gets combined into a product. And I think ultimately this will lead to a higher personalization, because you can serve a customer right at the point of need. You can attract new customers, can better retain your customer, be it on the retail or the corporate side of the bank. And last but not least, it will increase the speed of the bank, because independently, if you expose data and products to the outside, you will kind of modernize your infrastructure on the way of doing it. So it will also allow you to build products much faster on the inside going forward. And I think it's this combination that makes open banking very attractive.
And Daniel, look, it has to be stressed. I mean, okay, it's known to us, but banks aren't the only innovators in this space. And of course, people say, well, if the banks want to learn something, they should look to big tech. So what is it that they can take out of big tech and perhaps adapt to their own milieu?
Well, I think what a lot of banks are wrestling with is the fact that, you know, a great digital experience is really table stakes now. It's essential, but it's insufficient. Customers really expect that every time they open up that app or go online, everything's going to be frictionless and seamless, and they're going to be able to get their what they want accomplished, the task accomplished, and get through this thing pretty quickly and easily and conveniently. So I think what big tech is getting really good at now is engagement. They recognize the connection between kind of a constant series of engagement points with that customer and building trust over time, because the more you engage, the more often with a customer, the more that you generate revenue, and the more you promote trust and retention and all the good things that come from increasing client loyalty.
And Joris, I mean, look, whenever you talk about big tech, you can't get away from this question about whether big tech is a threat to the future of banks. I mean, is it? And if that's the case, if it really is that blunt, how is it that banks should respond to this? Because they do have the advantage. They've been around for a very long time, and they've had the time to build up their customer loyalty base, increase it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a big question, and I think the big techs have a clear advantage because they have a good technology basis. It's quite modern. They have a large customer base. They bet on strategic topics. They have this API mindset. Well, however, banks in return, I think they have an existing customer base as well. They offer very specific products, in particular on the corporate side. So I think how banks should definitely respond is to build the foundations for partners, because I believe it will be more about who will work with whom, with those skills and knowledge you can include into your own value chain. And I think it's about opening up technology-wise, right? Build an API-driven infrastructure, build the internal API mindset, as well as a product thinking mindset. I think this is equally important, to no longer think in terms of IT projects that you deliver and then once they are out there, they are out there, but rather think in terms of, okay, you develop a product, you understand the product, the problem you want to solve with it, and then maybe adopt it after the go-to-market while you learn how it works. And last but not least, also create the processes to do the onboarding in a fast and efficient way. And I think all of this basically is opening up and make partnerships an essential part of your DNA. And I think this is how banks should respond.
Some interesting points there, and I do want to look at them in the time that we have together. But before we move on to our next session of this discussion, what we're going to look at is technology as an enabler. So I'm sure it's going to incorporate some of the points that Joris referenced there. Just a reminder to you, the audience, please use that app to send in some questions. There's a lot of material that we've had so far come out of this discussion, more to come. If there's anything that you want to put to the panel, use that app. We'll try to deal with as many of the questions as we can in the time available. But Charlotte, let me put the spotlight on you again, because look, we know that customer expectations They are advancing quickly. COVID-19 perhaps accelerated that. And also there is that pressure to innovate at speed. But what technology infrastructure is actually needed if you're going to, or if a bank is going to do this successfully? It's a big investment of time and money.
It is. I mean, I think in a dream world, we'd all have core banking systems that were built within the last 20 years, wouldn't we? But unfortunately, we don't. But on that point, I mean, I think you do need a plan to figure out actually like what you're going to do about that. I think we can all look into the future and realise that we can't leave those core systems kind of as they are, and we need a plan to evolve them. And in terms of what that looks like and what we should be moving towards, it's kind of, it's all the buzzwords that we've all heard, right? Like you need to be cloud hosted, so you've got that flexibility to start small and scale fast. You need to be moving away from that kind of monolithic architecture to more kind of microservices and modular applications that are all plugged in by these APIs, so that you've got those kind of reusable components that you can use to kind of really build your feature teams around, enable them to be like genuinely agile, as opposed to this kind of waterfall agile thing that we're all like trying to do at the moment from an incumbent perspective. And I think looking at how you can get towards those platforms, you've got to decide, do you want to be the master of your own destiny? Are you going to really build that yourselves, or are we going to continue to be reliant on these other kind of big technology providers out there, really trying to sell to us? And I think that's the interesting thing with big tech, is like they're massive competition, but they're also, completely reliant on AWS and Google and Apple for distribution, hosting, all of it. So it's a really interesting kind of dilemma to be part of. And I think the exciting bit for me though is, I spend a lot of time looking out into the kind of fintech space at what they're all doing, and we kind of touched a little bit earlier about like embedded finance and super apps and what that really means. And Joris was kind of talking about it in terms of your APIs. If you can really build great APIs for yourselves as an organization, then that gives you the opportunity to kind of say, well, actually, how can I maybe provide those APIs as a service to other clients? And that's something that we've started to do a little bit at Barclays, or even kind of more in the US actually, where we have a kind of cards business where we basically do white label cards for brands. And we've been focusing quite a bit on what we do with exposing our APIs there, which has actually allowed us to embed our entire kind of credit card management and account opening and everything experience directly into Gap's like retail app, which is a huge game changer for them, and something that we would never have been able to do if we hadn't kind of gone down that API-led route.
But look, there's a lot going on in that space, and built within it is an aspiration list. And Daniel, that's the point. I mean, look, what do the priorities need to be? Because it's a big job ahead, and you've got to be ruthless, I guess, whittle things down, say, okay, we start here, then we move on to this point, and so on and so forth. How do you define those priorities? Sorry.
It's like how do you boil the ocean a little bit? But I think the priorities are different for different organizations, and I'm always coming at it from a customer experience perspective, because that's what I do, and that's where I'm coming from Medallia. And when I think about that, especially when it comes to product innovation, I think there's huge opportunity with respect to bringing customers closer to that process and really listening to those customers, both in the inception of ideas and the creation of ideas, getting feedback from customers on what their unmet needs are and what those friction points are that you can really solve for, because that's what fintechs are really doing. They're finding a real big problem that they can fix and pull out as a product and then sell it back, right? And so there's a huge opportunity then to connect the dots between your listening programs, whether that's direct from surveys or indirect from their behaviors and their interactions, and feeding that into your product development processes. And even a step further, I know that the next step in this is really integrating through APIs and out-of-the-box connectors and things like that are available to bring those customer insights and data into the product development workstream. Bring it straight into Jira, bring it straight into Confluence and other apps that you're using in product development, both pre-launch, in the development, but also as a constant feed after launch, and then doing A/B testing along the way to really refine that product as you go along. I don't think I see a lot of that going on necessarily, except for really advanced product teams.
Okay. Joris, let's look at the API infrastructure, something which I know you're very passionate about. But what do you see as the immediate action that banks themselves can take to make sure that they don't just get their API strategies right for now, but also for the long term?
I think they really need to push their reuse capabilities. And what this means infrastructure-wise is that they should start by building up an internal as well as external developer portal, where it's really easy to identify which APIs exist in the company, and not only for developers, but also for product managers, so that they can understand, okay, what can I build out of the existing services? I think this is quite essential. And then you obviously need to have a central API management and platform to publish the APIs. You might need to have teams to help with the design, to reduce the complexity when you expose an API to the outside, and really get into this way of thinking. Okay, whenever a new banking product is being developed, you try to reuse as much as possible. You have to think in terms of services, so that you do not build the KYC service and for different contexts again and again, but in a reusable way. And Charlotte mentioned agile work of mode of working. I think what is really, really important is that IT and business come close together. And at least I can say in our case, there was this long differentiation between what is business and what is IT. But I think it's essential that developers and product managers work closely together, as close as they can, to make this really happen also long term.
Let's pick up on this, Charlotte, because look, the bottom line, what Joris appears to be saying is that you can make this work if you've got that API first mindset. And that is the question, what does it actually mean, that mindset? And how should banks adapt if they're going to avoid an implementation that is fragmented? We can talk about silos, getting rid of them, etc. Easier said than done.
Yeah, so an API first mindset, as I kind of understand it, is really when you're kind of developing a new software application, building it in such a way where you've got the API that you're actually going to build at the end of it, the connecting that into that application to others, that's like a key part of your design process and how you go about the build of that application. And that's different from how you might have done it in the past to say like a code first application, where you kind of take your requirements and you build the application to do what it does, and then you figure out how to build an API that's going to plug into that application afterwards. And the risk with that can be that then you've built that application in a way that maybe actually makes it quite difficult to read or write the data from it, that you really need to be able to plug it into all of these other parts of your technology ecosystem. And I guess as a kind of layperson, I'm not actually a technologist. Someone explained it to me in quite a nice way with a metaphor, which was like, if you are in a restaurant and you've got your customer who is one application and maybe your kitchen who's another application, your API is kind of like the waiter who's going in between. And you wouldn't build your restaurant in a way where you had like 3 different sets of stairs that the waiter had to go through to get to the kitchen, and then you had all your ingredients like scattered around so that you couldn't find them. So that's kind of really what this like API first mindset is about. And I completely echo what kind of Joris was touching on around it being something that needs to be adopted by not just your technologists, but also the business people who should be working hand in hand, because it's all part of that collaborative technology building process. And I think Joris also touched on like several great points about how you really get after that as an organisation. And the bit that I would just add is documentation is like absolutely key. Like it should be standardised and written in a way where you don't need the person that built the API to sit next to the person who wants to use it so they can figure out what they're doing. It really needs to be like plug and play so that you can kind of democratise access to those APIs across your organisation.
Okay, great vision to have there. But look, I want to move on now to the final part of this discussion. I want to focus on how banks can differentiate themselves. Okay, and Joris, you're going to kick this off, because look, what is it that banks can do to ensure that they differentiate with purpose and vision? Really important, because they shouldn't lose sight of their identity and what they're all about. So from your perspective, what is it they need to do?
Yeah, it's 2 things. I think it's on one hand, they should ask themselves what they want to build on top of their APIs, like what products they want to build for their specific target group. So for instance, in our case, we have a product that allow corporate customers to include their banking data into their very own processes, and we provide them with flexibility. So this could be an example. I think on the other hand, it's about how banks build their ecosystems, which partnerships they enter, in which areas of the customer's life they want to play a part and where not, where they want to own the ecosystem or where they want to be a part of the ecosystem. And I think those two factors will basically build the identity of the bank.
Daniel, pick this up. Does it resonate with you what you've heard, and what else is it that needs to be factored in when you're trying to innovate and at the same time differentiate with a purpose? In other words, not losing the essence of your soul.
Yeah, well, it
Rather
definitely...
profound way of putting it, really, isn't it?
kind of keeps it light, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely resonates, and I think it's really important, you know. I think about the statement that the brand defines the promise, but the experience delivers it. And I think there's a really important point about understanding how the brand is expressed as a brand promise, and then how that then is expressed as a definition of your intended or your ideal experience. And from there, how that then permeates all the experiences that your customers receive on a day-to-day basis. And I think articulating that in a specific way with experience principles and experience standards could be really useful. But in a larger sense, what you triggered for me is this whole thing around really knowing what you stand for. And the CEO of Handelsbank brought it up earlier this morning about how important trust is.
This is Michael Sorensen.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, I was thinking of the same thing as I was preparing for that you know, roughly 2/3 of customers either choose or quit a brand, you know, based on what it stands for and the authenticity of that brand. And so if you think about that, you know, how do you know, I think there's a big question on how do you express your values all the way through the experience so that your customer understands that, you know, you have strong ESG, that you have strong DEI, that you know, your lending principles are really based on values and all the right kinds of things that go along with that. And so I think, you know, brand connection and values, you know, is the next step of experience design in terms of expressing that and what customers feel on an everyday basis.
So Charlotte, what it all boils down to is maintaining a change positive culture. I mean, these are key times that we're living in, yeah? But how do you make sure that you nurture that across the organisation and at the same time that you don't get change fatigue? Because I mean, we know that people are often very reluctant to change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So you've got to undermine that attitude if you can, or as far as you possibly can.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the ain't broke, don't fix it thing, I think there has to be like a degree of honesty.
We've moved on from the ain't broke.
Yeah, we've all, I think someone said it earlier, you know, kind of, we've all spent a lot of time and energy like creating these not really sleek digital experiences that have kind of been like papering over the cracks a little bit to some extent. And like now's when the rubber really needs to start hitting the road, and we need to be like digital back to front, not like digital front end only. And I guess, you know, change is hard, isn't it? And so you have to over communicate as leaders about why it's going to be really good for business and create opportunities for your people and really get people kind of enthused about that. And I think the other thing with change is kind of celebrating the journey and the mindset and the people that you have who are taking you there, not just the outcomes at the end of it, because sometimes we don't always get there, right? And I think part of that is it's about like the mindset as well, and like really recognizing the behaviors of the people in your organization in terms of who's done a great job of, you know, challenging something in a really positive way that's had a great outcome, or really driving that kind of next level of success. And I think the other thing that like I reflect on is like just being someone in one of these like big organizations where there is like always change going on, is that it's not just about like what you say in your communications, is it? Like we've got loads and loads of like thousands, tens of thousands of colleagues, and they're all reading into what you do and the decisions that you make, probably more so than what you actually say in your communications. So we all have to really sort of reflect on what are we doing to send the right signals there. You know, are we looking at creating training pathways to bring your operational colleagues into the technology roles that you really need going forward. You know, are we taking the right decisions to really enable people to do the change that we're saying that we want? Are we, like, you know, in our change portfolios, making a few transformational bets that like people can be really excited about, as well as that stuff that is just, you know, we all know we've got to do around automation and kind of digitizing these bits of the kind of operational process, because cost saves are really important, but they probably inspire finance more than like the rest of us, right? So I think that's kind of how I look at it. And I guess, you know, change fatigue, I don't think people get fatigued by bad outcomes. So maybe they do a bit, but more so it's like when things aren't quite going that way that they get fatigued.
Learning from the mistake rather than being
exactly
overwhelmed by it.
That's it. It's kind of really empathizing with the challenges that colleagues are having, reflecting on what's not working and kind of doing that openly, and then actually taking measures to show that you're learning from that as you like progress with that change.
Okay then, look, we can close this out now, but don't go away yet. you still have a few more minutes, because we've actually had some questions come through from the audience. So if there are more that you want to send, please do in the time available. But guys, are you ready? Okay, they're primed up and ready to answer. Okay, that's good. Here we go, kick off with the first one. You mentioned the threat of big tech. What other sectors will significantly impact customer expectations and influence banking propositions? Rule of thumb here, any hesitation, then I choose somebody to answer. Wouldn't you like to tackle this one, Joris? Totally unfazed.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I can say there's a certain sector. I think it's generally speaking, I think is how Daniel put it, right? The expectation of the customer changes because they see great products they're using and addressing a certain need, right? It can be a bigger or smaller product, but the better it serves the customer in easing a process, making stuff simple, I think that's key. And you can see many good examples in the different sectors. And I think the spread comes from rather not changing as a bank, right? Like not opening up in terms of, okay, what are the opportunities? What can we make out of it through partnerships, through open data? And I think to me that's the key of embracing this change as a bank.
Would you like to add to that at all? Would anyone else like to add to it? Daniel?
I'm trying to think of, you know, what industry sectors aren't impacted, you know, and aren't facing massive change from all of this, you know, and but the ones that pop out, you know, that we think about it every day, you know, at Medallia, that are really going through massive change from all of this is like healthcare, you know, when you think about the opportunities there. And insurance, right, and of course retail, you know, when you talk about decentralized finance and, you know, buy now, pay later, and you know, other kinds of payment processes are going through massive change and trying to figure out how that all comes part of the customer or patient experience.
Okay, Charlotte.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bit that I don't see big techs going after is the balance sheet stuff, right? Like all of the like big meaty lending and that kind of thing. So I think we're good there. But that does mean that maybe like everything else is kind of fair game. So, you know, all of the kind of experience, distribution, that side of things. So, yeah.
Okay, we've got about 3 more minutes left. How do you see things like AML and KYC checks in onboarding either prohibiting or enabling new journeys? Who would like to tackle that one? Would you like to tackle that one, Daniel?
Well, I'm reaching back to, you know, I spent about a year working on onboarding before I came to Medallia, and you know, AML and KYC, and I've got a US perspective on this, you know, which you have to do that. And I think it mostly gets in the way. But what we're seeing now is much better processes and capabilities by providers to onboarding systems to really smooth that out. But what you brought up earlier is that we're encumbered a lot by, you know, sort of legacy systems and packages that we're sort of stuck with our core banking systems.
It's the first time we've heard legacy systems actually being mentioned.
I hope there's still such a thing. I think there is.
No, they haven't gone away, don't worry.
So, but to the extent that, you know, the willingness and risk appetite is there, those problems can be solved. I mean, you know, I don't remember his name, but the HSBC gentleman talked about how onboarding account applications can be done in 5 minutes online.
That's Nuno Mantis, our opening speaker at HSBC. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like to add to that at all, Charlotte and Joris? Who'd like to go first?
I mean, I'll go. I mean,
yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, please go ahead, Charlotte. Sorry.
I was just going to be quick. It's just, I think it's definitely going to get easier. And I think regulations are probably going to be the driver that will help get us there. You know, if we think we're going to move towards a more robust kind of digital identity scheme kind of regulation in that space, and open data, all of these things really help us understand who people are. And so I think the future's bright, but I don't know how far away it is.
Mm-hmm. And Joris?
Yeah, I would like to add another perspective. I think it also, if you think of banks wanting to partner, you also get into KYC for the partnerships and to assess the partnerships. So I think that's another great example of change that has to happen to make partnerships work. Because in order to design simple KYC processes or make them as easy as they can be for new partners, you have to sit down with legal, with compliance, maybe data protection, so a lot of different parties to whom you have to explain what is open banking, etc., etc. So I think it's an essential part to have lean processes and to involve the whole organization. And this is an example why open banking is not only an example, transformation for the technology side, but also for everyone within the company.
Okay, we have about 1 minute left, so if you could be very, very brief in your responses. How will propositions for SMEs evolve? Very briefly, who'd like to set the ball rolling?
I can go.
Go for it.
I think they're just going to get more and more integrated with the other kind of aspects of how SMEs do their business. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of kind of partnerships occurring in the last sort of year or so between banks and the big like accounting platforms. So I think that's a significant piece that we also really need to look at, like cross-border payments and kind of how we make that a lot easier. And there was another thing that I can't remember, so
It'll come back to you later. Daniel.
I think now, technology is really helping banks to really deliver, like what you were saying, all the big bank the big enterprise propositions at scale to small enterprises, and then you see a lot more banks really opening up their focus on small to medium enterprises. So I think there'll come a day when it's just as easy for a small and medium enterprise, even starting out, to get everything they need from a business banking perspective.
Fantastic. And final word to Joris on this, please.
I think the services for SMEs will become more contextualized, so it's not the SME who has to go to platform A, B, or C, but it's rather that the bank will be integrated within the processes within the SME. So it will be much easier and faster in the future.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We're going to have to close it now, but a big thank you to our panel for their brilliant contributions. Joris, Charlotte, and Daniel, thank you.